Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. From a small city-state on the Italian peninsula to a colossal empire that dominated the known world, its eagle standards casting a shadow from the deserts of Syria to the misty shores of Britain. It was a civilization that gave us law, language, architecture, and engineering that still echoes in our modern lives. But how did this titan of history rise from obscurity to command a quarter of the world's population? And more importantly, how did it all come crashing down in a storm of fire and steel? Join us as we journey through a millennium of glory, betrayal, conquest, and collapse to uncover the epic story of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Before we can understand the woman who would be called the she-wolf of France, we must first journey back in time to the very origin of that fearsome title. The story of Rome does not begin with marble halls and legions, but in darkness, with a desperate act of preservation. The twin infants, Romulus and Remus, grandsons of a deposed king, are cast into the river Tiber, a death sentence handed down by their usurping great-uncle. But fate, or perhaps the gods themselves, intervened. The basket carrying the boys washed ashore at the foot of the Palatine Hill, where they were discovered not by a human, but by a she-wolf, the lupa. In a moment that would define an empire, this creature of the wild, a predator, did not devour the helpless infants. Instead, she suckled them, offering them life from her own body. This foundational myth is steeped in a profound duality. The wolf is a symbol of savage, untamed nature, of ferocity and danger. Yet here she is the ultimate nurturer, the savior, the surrogate mother to a future civilization. This paradox is the key to the archetype. The she-wolf is not merely a protector. She is a figure of immense and unpredictable power, capable of both creating and destroying. She operates outside the established patriarchal order, a force of nature that cannot be easily controlled. This image of the maternal beast, the fierce protector of her line who will kill to defend her young, resonated for centuries. It became a symbol for women who wielded power in a man's world, who were forced to be cunning, ruthless, and sometimes cruel to survive and ensure their legacy. The lupa of Rome fed the founders of an empire with her milk. Isabella of France would feed her son's ambition for the English throne with the blood of his father's regime. The story of Romulus and Remus ends in fratricide, a bloody reminder that the building of nations is often a violent affair. One brother kills another to claim sole ownership of the city they founded. This too is a lesson in power. Ambition, once unleashed, can consume everything, even kinship. It is a grim prophecy, echoing down the ages to the court of Edward II, where the bonds of marriage and fealty would be shattered by a queen who embraced the spirit of the wolf. The city founded by the wolf's adopted son did not begin as a republic. For 2.5 centuries, Rome was ruled by a succession of 7 kings, a period shrouded in a mixture of legend and historical fact. This era began with Romulus, the warrior founder, and ended with the reign of a tyrant, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. The story of this transition from monarchy to republic is not one of peaceful political evolution, but of violent upheaval, sparked by royal corruption and a profound sense of violated honor. Tarquin ruled not as a benevolent leader, but as a despot, trampling on the traditions and the Senate that had guided Rome. His reign was characterized by extravagance, endless wars to fund his projects, and a climate of fear. The tipping point, however, was a deeply personal crime that became a national catalyst. His son, Sextus Tarquinius, consumed by lust and arrogance, raped Lucretia, the virtuous wife of a nobleman. Her subsequent suicide, after extracting an oath of vengeance from her father and husband, ignited the flames of revolution. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the Roman aristocracy rose up, expelling Tarquin and his family from the city forever. In the aftermath, they swore an oath that no man would ever be king in Rome again. This dramatic overthrow established a core principle in the Roman psyche: a deep-seated hatred of monarchy and an unwavering commitment to a system of shared governance, the res publica, or public affair. This narrative provides a powerful historical blueprint for the toppling of a corrupt sovereign. It demonstrates how the personal failings and abuses of a king, and those he favors, can erode the very foundations of his authority. King Edward II of England, like Tarquin, was seen as an ineffectual and tyrannical ruler, guided not by the counsel of his nobles, but by his personal favorites. First Piers Gaveston, and later the Despensers. Their perceived corruption and undue influence alienated the established aristocracy, creating fertile ground for rebellion. Isabella of France, like the avenging Brutus, would become the figurehead for this widespread discontent. She channeled the anger of a disenfranchised nobility and a suffering populace, transforming a dynastic struggle into a righteous crusade against a king unfit to rule, proving that sometimes the only answer to tyranny is its complete and total abolition. The birth of the Roman Republic did not create a society of equals. The expulsion of the kings simply transferred power from a single monarch to a closed circle of aristocratic families known as the patricians. They controlled the Senate, held all religious offices, and interpreted the laws to their own benefit. The vast majority of the population, the plebeians, commoners, artisans, farmers, and merchants, had duties to the state, including military service, but possessed few rights and no real political voice. This fundamental inequality sparked a centuries-long social and political conflict known as the struggle of the orders. It was a cold war fought not with swords, but with strikes, political maneuvering, and the constant threat of societal collapse. The plebeians' greatest weapon was their necessity. They were the soldiers in the army and the workers who fed the city. On several occasions, they wielded this power through the Secessio Plebis, a mass strike where they would abandon Rome, leaving the patricians defenseless and without a labor force. This collective action forced the ruling class to the negotiating table. Over 200 years of struggle, the plebeians slowly chipped away at the patrician monopoly on power. They won the right to have their own elected officials, the tribunes of the plebs, who could veto acts of the Senate. They compelled the codification and publication of the laws in the 12 tables, so they could no longer be arbitrarily changed by patrician magistrates. Eventually, they won the right to hold the highest offices of the state, including the consulship, effectively integrating themselves into the ruling class. This protracted struggle offers a vital lesson in the mechanics of power and rebellion. It shows that a ruler or a ruling class cannot govern effectively without the consent and cooperation of the broader population, especially the powerful factions within it. King Edward II and his favorites, the Despensers, behaved much like the early patricians, consolidating wealth and power while alienating a broad coalition of powerful barons, clergy, and merchants. Isabella of France, upon her return to England, did not act alone. Her success was predicated on her ability to harness the deep-seated grievances of these alienated groups, creating a powerful anti-Edwardian coalition. She became the tribune for all those who felt disenfranchised by the king's misrule, transforming a personal quest for power into a popular uprising against an unjust order. Once Rome had solidified its republic and consolidated control over the Italian peninsula, it came face to face with its first true existential threat: the mighty maritime empire of Carthage. Located in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was a naval and commercial superpower that dominated the Western Mediterranean. The ensuing conflict, a series of 3 brutal wars spanning over a century known as the Punic Wars, was a crucible that would forge the Roman character and set it on the path to global domination. This was not a minor border skirmish. It was a total war between 2 titans, a struggle for the very survival and soul of their respective civilizations. The First Punic War was a naval contest for control of Sicily, which Rome won through sheer grit and an uncanny ability to adapt, building a fleet from scratch to challenge the Carthaginian masters of the sea. The Second Punic War is the most famous, defined by the military genius of one man, Hannibal Barca. His audacious crossing of the Alps with an army and war elephants, and his subsequent string of devastating victories against Roman legions, brought Rome to the absolute brink of annihilation. For over a decade, Hannibal rampaged through Italy, a constant specter of defeat haunting the Republic. Yet Rome refused to break. It absorbed catastrophic losses that would have shattered any other state, demonstrating a resilience and collective will that was perhaps its greatest weapon. Ultimately, under the command of Scipio Africanus, they took the fight to Africa, forcing Hannibal to return home and defeating him at the Battle of Zama. This epic struggle highlights the anatomy of a high-stakes invasion and the immense risks involved in challenging an established power. Isabella of France's invasion of England in 1326 was her Punic War. Like the Romans challenging Carthage on the seas, she had to build a coalition and a mercenary army on the continent, a risky venture funded by foreign powers. Her crossing of the English Channel was her crossing of the Alps, a daring gamble against a numerically superior foe on his home territory. King Edward II, like the Roman Senate facing Hannibal, was the entrenched power. But Isabella, like Hannibal in his early campaigns, capitalized on speed, surprise, and the deep unpopularity of her opponent, causing his support to crumble with astonishing speed. She understood that victory required not just military force, but the will to risk everything on a single decisive campaign to unseat a rival. The year is 218 BC. A shadow falls over the Roman Republic, a shadow cast by the Alps. From across these formidable peaks, a Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca achieved the impossible, marching an army complete with war elephants into the heart of Italy. This was not merely an invasion. It was an existential threat, a challenge to the very soul of Rome. The initial encounters were catastrophic for the Republic. At the Trebia River, and then at Lake Trasimene, Roman legions, confident in their invincibility, were systematically outmaneuvered and annihilated by Hannibal's tactical genius. The shock waves of these defeats reverberated through the marble halls of the Senate. Panic began to grip the city. Yet, the worst was yet to come. In 216 BC, near the town of Cannae, Rome mustered its largest army ever assembled, nearly 80,000 men determined to crush the Carthaginian menace once and for all. The consuls, Varro and Paulus, threw their legions forward in a massive, deep formation. Hannibal, with a numerically inferior force, did the unthinkable. He allowed his center to buckle, drawing the Roman mass deeper and deeper into a trap. Then, his elite cavalry, having routed their Roman counterparts, swept around to attack the legions from behind. The result was a perfect double envelopment, a tactical masterpiece that is still studied in military academies today. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. By sunset, as many as 70,000 Romans lay dead on the field, one of the bloodiest single days in military history. The news reached Rome, and the city descended into a state of profound terror. The cry, "Hannibal ad portas," Hannibal at the gates, became a real and terrifying possibility. The Republic was on its knees, its armies shattered, its allies wavering. Any lesser state would have collapsed, sued for peace, and accepted its fate. But Rome did not. In this darkest of hours, the Republic's true character was forged. They refused to negotiate. They appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus, who adopted a controversial strategy of attrition, shadowing Hannibal's army, but refusing to engage in open battle, earning him the nickname the Delayer. Rome bled, it suffered, and it endured, slowly rebuilding its strength. The war would rage for another 14 years in Italy, but the moment of ultimate crisis had passed. The Republic had stared into the abyss and had not blinked. Having survived the crucible of the Second Punic War, Rome was transformed. The existential dread of Hannibal's campaign was replaced by an unshakable confidence and a newfound, ravenous appetite for expansion. The legions, once a citizen militia fighting for survival, were now a hardened professional force, and the Mediterranean lay open before them. The Senate, no longer content with merely securing Italy, looked east to the wealthy, sophisticated Hellenistic kingdoms, the successors to Alexander the Great's empire. The first target was Macedon under Philip V. At the Battle of Cynocephalae in 197 BC, the rigid Macedonian phalanx, which had dominated battlefields for centuries, proved fatally inflexible against the Roman legion's maniples. The victory was decisive. Rome declared the Greek cities free, a cynical move that in reality made them client states. A few decades later, Philip's successor, Perseus, tried to reassert Macedonian power, only to be utterly crushed at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC. The kingdom of Macedon was dissolved, its territory absorbed. The legions were unleashed. The year 146 BC stands as a brutal testament to Rome's New World Order. In Greece, the Achaean League's rebellion was mercilessly stamped out. As an example to all who would defy them, the Romans sacked the ancient and wealthy city of Corinth, killing the men, enslaving the women and children, and leveling the city to the ground. In the very same year, the final act of the Punic rivalry played out. Driven by the relentless rhetoric of senators like Cato the Elder, who famously ended every speech with "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed, Rome launched the Third Punic War. It was a war of annihilation. After a 3-year siege, Carthage fell. The city was systematically burned, its foundations sown with salt, and its people massacred or sold into slavery. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, the Mediterranean Sea was, for all intents and purposes, a Roman lake, or as they called it, Mare Nostrum, our sea. From the silver mines of Spain to the fertile lands of Africa, from the plains of Italy to the ancient cities of Greece, all bowed before the eagle standard of the legions. Unimaginable wealth poured into Rome, but this torrent of plunder and slaves carried with it the seeds of the Republic's own destruction. The spoils of empire had a corrosive effect on the Roman Republic. The immense wealth flowed not to the common citizen, but to the senatorial elite, who bought up vast tracts of land, creating massive slave-run plantations known as latifundia. The small-scale citizen farmers, the very backbone of the Roman army and society, were driven from their ancestral lands, unable to compete. They flocked to Rome, swelling the ranks of a landless, disenfranchised urban mob. This growing social crisis did not go unnoticed. In 133 BC, a young nobleman named Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune of the plebs. Traveling through Etruria, he had been appalled to see the Italian countryside worked by foreign slaves, while the citizens who had won the empire were dispossessed. He believed this injustice threatened the very foundation of Rome. Invoking an ancient law that limited the amount of public land one individual could own, Tiberius proposed a radical land reform bill. His goal was simple, and to him, just: to redistribute excess public land held by the rich to the landless poor. The senatorial aristocracy, however, saw this as a direct attack on their wealth and property. They viewed Tiberius not as a reformer, but as a revolutionary demagogue aiming for tyranny. When a fellow tribune, a pawn of the Senate, vetoed his legislation, Tiberius took the unprecedented step of having the tribune deposed by a vote of the people. This shattered centuries of political tradition. He pushed his law through, but in doing so, he had made powerful and ruthless enemies. When he stood for re-election, a mob of senators and their clients, led by the Pontifex Maximus himself, marched on the assembly, armed with clubs and broken furniture. Tiberius and 300 of his followers were beaten to death, their bodies unceremoniously dumped into the Tiber. For the first time in centuries, political blood had been spilled in the streets of Rome. A decade later, his younger, more charismatic brother, Gaius Gracchus, took up the cause. Gaius enacted an even broader program of reforms, but he met the same fate. The Senate passed a decree empowering the consuls to do whatever was necessary to protect the state, and Gaius and thousands of his supporters were hunted down and killed. The Gracchi had failed, but their tragic story was a point of no return. They had exposed the deep, irreconcilable divisions in Roman society and had unleashed political violence as a tool to solve disputes. The Republic would never be the same. The bloody precedent set by the murder of the Gracchi brothers opened the floodgates. The final century of the Republic would be defined by the clash of ambitious strongmen, men who valued personal power over the good of the state. The first of these titans were Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Marius was a novus homo, a new man from outside the traditional Roman aristocracy, who rose through the ranks on sheer military talent. He was a brilliant commander who saved Rome from invading Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutones, earning him unprecedented consecutive consulships and the title Third Founder of Rome. His most lasting impact, however, was his radical reform of the army. By abolishing the property requirement for service, he opened the legions to the landless poor, promising them land and spoils in return for their loyalty. In doing so, he created a professional army, but one whose allegiance was not to the Senate and people of Rome, but to their general. This single change would prove to be the Republic's death sentence. Marius's great rival was Sulla, a patrician of impeccable lineage but impoverished means, who was both ambitious and utterly ruthless. Their rivalry festered for years, finally exploding over who would receive the lucrative command of the war against Mithridates of Pontus. The Senate gave it to Sulla, but Marius, using his political allies, had the command transferred to himself. Sulla's response was unthinkable. He did what no Roman commander had ever dared to do. He turned his legions against his own country. He marched on Rome, seized the city by force, and had Marius declared an enemy of the state. After Sulla departed for the east, a vengeful Marius returned from exile in Africa. With his ally Cinna, he retook Rome and unleashed a horrifying purge, slaughtering his political opponents in the streets. But Sulla was not finished. Victorious in the east, he returned to Italy, defeated the Marian forces in a brutal civil war, and once again took Rome. He had himself declared dictator for the reconstitution of the Republic, a title that gave him absolute power. He then unleashed the proscriptions, a systematic and legalized campaign of murder. Lists of his enemies were posted in the forum, and anyone could kill a proscribed man and claim a reward. Thousands were murdered, their property confiscated to enrich Sulla and his partisans. Sulla eventually retired, but the damage was done. He had provided the terrifying blueprint for the Republic's destruction. March on Rome with a loyal army, eliminate your rivals, and seize absolute power. In the annals of history, few names evoke the spirit of rebellion quite like Spartacus. His is not a story of political maneuvering or dynastic ambition, but one of raw, desperate defiance against the most powerful empire the world had ever known. Around 73 BC, the Roman Republic was at the zenith of its power, its legions having conquered vast territories. Yet, within its heartland, a fire was about to be kindled in the most unlikely of places, a gladiatorial school in Capua. Spartacus, a Thracian auxiliary soldier forced into slavery and trained to kill for sport, was its catalyst. Alongside dozens of his fellow gladiators, he instigated a breakout, armed with little more than kitchen knives and stolen equipment. What began as a desperate bid for freedom rapidly escalated into a full-scale war. Fleeing to the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, the small band of rebels became a magnet for the dispossessed. Escaped slaves, shepherds, and rural laborers flocked to his banner, swelling his ranks into a formidable army. Rome, initially contemptuous, dispatched small, ill-prepared forces to crush the uprising, only to see them humiliated and defeated. Spartacus proved to be a military genius, employing brilliant guerrilla tactics to outmaneuver and destroy successive Roman armies. His forces surged across the Italian peninsula, plundering estates and liberating slaves, their numbers growing to an estimated 70,000. For 2 years, they were an unstoppable force, a terrifying specter, haunting the Roman elite, who feared a complete collapse of their slave-based social order. However, the rebellion was plagued by internal divisions. While Spartacus seemingly intended to lead his people north, over the Alps to freedom in their homelands, other factions, led by his subordinate Crixus, favored plunder and vengeance within Italy. This schism proved fatal. After splitting from the main force, Crixus and his men were cornered and annihilated. Meanwhile, a panicked Senate finally recognized the existential threat and gave extraordinary powers to the immensely wealthy Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus, armed with 8 legions, pursued Spartacus with relentless determination, famously reviving the brutal punishment of decimation to instill discipline in his own troops. He eventually trapped the slave army in the toe of Italy. In a final desperate battle in 71 BC, the rebellion was brutally crushed. Spartacus himself died in the fray, his body never identified. As a horrific warning to all who would defy Rome, Crassus crucified 6,000 captured survivors along the Appian Way, the main road leading to the capital. The slave who shook Rome was dead, but his legend as a symbol of the fight for freedom had just begun. By 49 BC, Gaius Julius Caesar was the most famous man in the Roman world. His decade-long conquest of Gaul had brought immense wealth, territory, and, most importantly, the unwavering loyalty of a battle-hardened army. He was a populist hero, a brilliant general, and a masterful politician. But in the marble halls of the Senate, this popularity was seen not as an asset to the Republic, but as a mortal threat. His rivals, led by his former ally Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, feared Caesar's ambition. They saw in him the specter of a king, an intolerable concept for a republic that had overthrown its monarchy centuries earlier. The political tension had reached a boiling point. The Senate, manipulated by Caesar's enemies, issued an ultimatum. Caesar must relinquish command of his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen, where he would undoubtedly face prosecution and political ruin. Caesar was cornered. He stood with his 13th Legion on the banks of a small, insignificant river in northern Italy called the Rubicon. By Roman law, the Rubicon marked the sacred boundary of Rome's heartland. Any general who crossed it with his army still under command would be declared an enemy of the state, an act of unforgivable treason. For Caesar, the choice was stark: submission and the end of his career, or rebellion and civil war. He paced the riverbank, weighing the consequences of a decision that would alter the course of Western civilization. It was a moment of profound gravity, the point of no return. The historian Suetonius tells us that after a period of intense deliberation, Caesar declared to his men, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. With those words, he spurred his horse into the water and led his legion across. This single act was a declaration of war against the Senate and the entire Republican establishment. The news of his crossing spread like wildfire, causing sheer panic in Rome. Pompey and the majority of the senators, overestimating Caesar's numbers and underestimating his speed, abandoned the capital and fled south, hoping to regroup in Greece. Caesar's march through Italy was less a military conquest and more a victory parade. Cities opened their gates to him without a fight. The crossing of the Rubicon was more than a military maneuver. It was a symbolic act that demonstrated the fatal weakness of the Republic's institutions. It showed that the loyalty of soldiers now lay with their generals, not the state, and that the ambition of a single man could now shatter a centuries-old political order. The Republic was breathing its last, and the path to empire was now irrevocably open. By early 44 BC, Julius Caesar stood as the undisputed master of Rome. The civil wars were over, his rivals defeated or dead. The Senate had showered him with unprecedented honors, ultimately declaring him Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. While he had restored stability and initiated popular reforms, his accumulation of power deeply unsettled the traditional Roman aristocracy. They saw his every move, his golden throne in the Senate, the image of his face on coins, his rejection of the crown, while clearly enjoying the offer, as proof that he intended to dismantle the Republic and declare himself king. For a group of proud senators who traced their lineage back to the founders of the Republic, this was an existential threat to their very identity and freedom. A conspiracy began to coalesce in the shadows, a desperate plan to save the Republic by eliminating the man they saw as its tyrant. The plot was led by two men of contrasting motivations: Gaius Cassius Longinus, a bitter longtime opponent of Caesar, and Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar held in high esteem, treating him almost as a son. Brutus's involvement lent the conspiracy an air of philosophical legitimacy. He was descended from the man who had expelled Rome's last king 5 centuries earlier. More than 60 senators, calling themselves the Liberatores, or Liberators, joined the plot. They decided to strike on the Ides of March 15th, during a Senate meeting to be held at the Theater of Pompey. The omens were reportedly dire. Caesar's wife Calpurnia had dreamed of his murder, and a soothsayer had famously warned him to beware the Ides of March. Yet, dismissing these warnings with characteristic fatalism, Caesar proceeded to the Senate. As he took his seat, the conspirators surrounded him, pretending to present a petition. One of them, Tullius Cimber, pulled at Caesar's toga, the prearranged signal. Immediately, the others drew daggers concealed in their robes and began to stab him. Caesar fought back until he saw Brutus among his attackers. According to tradition, his final heartbroken words were, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus." He then pulled his toga over his head and fell, lifeless, at the base of a statue of his great rival, Pompey, having suffered 23 stab wounds. The assassins had succeeded in killing the man, but their belief that this would restore the Republic was a catastrophic miscalculation. Instead of being hailed as heroes, they unleashed a new wave of chaos and civil war. Caesar's death created a power vacuum that would ultimately be filled not by a restored Senate, but by his heir, Octavian, who would finish what Caesar started and become Rome's first emperor. The Ides of March did not save the Republic. It merely signed its death warrant. The assassination of Julius Caesar did not restore the Republic. It plunged the Roman world into 13 more years of brutal civil war. By 31 BC, the final conflict had arrived, pitting the last two powerful men of the age against each other in a struggle for absolute control. In the West was Caesar's adopted son and heir, the cunning and patient Octavian. In the East was the charismatic and brilliant general Mark Antony, who had allied himself, both politically and romantically, with the last pharaoh of Egypt, Queen Cleopatra. This was not just a clash of two men, but a clash of two worlds. Octavian's brilliant propaganda machine painted Antony as a man who had abandoned his Roman heritage, bewitched by an Eastern queen and her decadent luxuries. He positioned himself as the defender of Roman tradition against foreign corruption, setting the stage for a final, decisive confrontation. The climax came on September 2nd, 31st BC in the Ionian Sea, off a promontory in western Greece named Actium. It was to be one of the largest naval battles in history. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a massive fleet of over 400 large, powerful warships, almost like floating fortresses. Octavian's fleet, under the command of his supremely gifted admiral, Marcus Agrippa, consisted of smaller, more agile Liburnian galleys. As the battle raged, Antony's larger ships found themselves outmaneuvered by Agrippa's nimbler vessels, which could dart in, attack, and retreat. The fighting was fierce and indecisive for hours, a chaotic maelstrom of ramming ships, catapult fire, and desperate hand-to-hand combat. Then the inexplicable happened. For reasons still debated by historians, Cleopatra, commanding her own squadron of 60 ships, suddenly broke from the battle line and sailed away, heading for the open sea and the safety of Egypt. Seeing her depart, Mark Antony, in a shocking dereliction of duty, abandoned his flagship and his men. He boarded a smaller, faster vessel and followed his queen, leaving his vast and still fighting fleet leaderless. The effect on morale was catastrophic. Some commanders fought on bravely, but with their leader gone, the cause was lost. By the end of the day, most of Antony's fleet had been destroyed or had surrendered. His land forces, watching the disaster unfold from the shore, defected to Octavian a week later. The Battle of Actium was a complete and total victory for Octavian. Within a year, he would pursue the lovers to Alexandria, where they would both take their own lives. With their deaths, Octavian stood alone, the undisputed master of the Roman world. The final war of the Republic was over, and the Roman Empire was about to be born. The assassination of Julius Caesar had plunged Rome back into the bloody chaos of civil war, a brutal power vacuum that his young heir, Octavian, would navigate with a cunning that belied his years. After vanquishing his rivals, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, at the Battle of Actium, Octavian stood alone, the undisputed master of the Roman world. Yet he knew that the title of king was a death sentence in a city that had overthrown its monarchy centuries earlier. Instead, he orchestrated a political masterpiece. In 27 BC, he made a grand show of returning power to the Senate and the Roman people, who in turn showered him with honors and the new name Augustus, the revered one. He claimed to be merely the princeps, or first citizen, restoring the Republic. In reality, he had laid the foundations of an empire, retaining ultimate control over the military, the finances, and the provinces. This careful construction of power, masking autocracy with republican tradition, was the cornerstone of his long and transformative reign. For the first time in generations, the gates of the Temple of Janus were closed, symbolizing a state of peace throughout the Roman world. This was the dawn of the Pax Romana, an unprecedented era of stability and prosperity that would last for 2 centuries. Augustus was not just a military victor, he was a master administrator. He reformed the tax system, established a professional standing army loyal only to him, created the Praetorian Guard, and initiated a vast program of public works that famously transformed Rome from a city of brick to a city of marble. He promoted traditional Roman values, family life, and religion, believing a moral restoration was as crucial as a political one. He was a patron of the arts, with figures like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid flourishing under his influence, their works shaping the cultural identity of the New Age. Augustus ruled for over 40 years, a period of unparalleled length that allowed his new system to take firm root. He had found Rome bleeding from civil strife and left it peaceful, powerful, and redefined. The Republic was a ghost, and the age of emperors had begun. The stability Augustus had so carefully crafted was immediately put to the test by his successors, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The system of succession was the empire's inherent weakness, and the first imperial family would become a gallery of paranoia, excess, and madness. Augustus's chosen heir was his stepson, Tiberius, a gloomy and capable general who grew increasingly reclusive and suspicious during his reign. He retreated to the island of Capri, leaving Rome in the hands of the ruthless Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, unleashing a wave of treason trials and executions that poisoned the political atmosphere. Upon Tiberius's death, the throne passed to his grandnephew, Caligula. Initially beloved, his reign quickly descended into a fever dream of tyranny and absurdity. He demanded to be worshipped as a living god, engaged in scandalous affairs, squandered the treasury on lavish projects, and famously was said to have planned to appoint his horse, Incitatus, as consul. His erratic and brutal behavior made him intolerable, and he was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard, the very body designed to protect the emperor. In the ensuing chaos, the guards discovered Caligula's uncle, the stammering and physically infirm Claudius, hiding behind a curtain. Proclaimed emperor on the spot, Claudius proved to be a surprisingly effective administrator. He oversaw the conquest of Britain, invested in infrastructure, and reformed the bureaucracy. Yet, his reign was plagued by the machinations of his ambitious wives, Messalina and Agrippina the Younger. It was Agrippina who allegedly poisoned him to secure the throne for her own son, Nero. Nero's rule began promisingly, but devolved into a spectacle of artistic vanity and murderous tyranny. He executed his own mother, his first wife, and his tutor Seneca. His infamous persecution of Christians after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD became a symbol of imperial cruelty. Ultimately, facing rebellion from the army and declared a public enemy by the Senate, Nero took his own life, ending the Julio-Claudian line and plunging the empire once more into civil war. The death of Nero in 68 AD ripped the mask off the Augustan settlement. Without a clear successor from the Julio-Claudian line, the carefully constructed illusion of a restored republic vanished, revealing the raw truth. The Roman Empire now belonged to whoever had the strongest army. The year that followed, 69 AD, would go down in history as the year of the four emperors, a terrifying and bloody whirlwind of civil war that exposed the fragility of the imperial system. The first to claim the throne was Servius Sulpicius Galba, the governor of Spain who had led the revolt against Nero. An old stern disciplinarian, he quickly alienated the Praetorian Guard by refusing to pay the bonus they expected for their support. This fatal miscalculation led to his downfall. The Praetorians, the supposed kingmakers in Rome, turned to the wealthy and influential Marcus Salvius Otho, who had them murder Galba in the Roman Forum after a reign of just 7 months. Otho's grasp on power, however, was immediately challenged. The powerful legions stationed on the Rhine frontier had already declared their own commander, Aulus Vitellius, as emperor. Armies that were supposed to be guarding the borders of the empire now marched on each other. At the First Battle of Bedriacum in northern Italy, Vitellius's forces crushed Otho's, prompting Otho to commit suicide to prevent further bloodshed. Vitellius then entered Rome, where he proceeded to rule with gluttonous indulgence and incompetence. But another challenger was already rising. In the east, the legions declared their allegiance to Titus Flavius Vespasianus, the general commanding the war in Judea. While Vespasian secured control of the vital grain supply from Egypt, his subordinate, Antonius Primus, led the Danubian legions on a swift and brutal march into Italy. The forces of Vespasian and Vitellius clashed at the Second Battle of Bedriacum, a horrific night battle that ended in a decisive victory for the Flavians. Rome itself was then sacked, and Vitellius was captured, tortured, and killed. With the Senate's formal recognition, Vespasian became the fourth and final emperor of that chaotic year, tasked with restoring order from the ashes. Out of the chaos of civil war and the decadence of the Julio-Claudians, the Roman Empire entered what historian Edward Gibbon would later call its happiest and most prosperous period. This era, beginning with the accession of Nerva in 96 AD, was defined by the rule of the five good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Their success was built upon a crucial innovation that broke the cycle of hereditary disaster: adoptive succession. Instead of power passing to a blood relative, each emperor chose a proven and capable successor based on merit, adopting him as his son and heir. This ensured a string of competent and stable rulers for nearly a century. Nerva's short reign stabilized the state after the assassination of the tyrannical Domitian. His greatest contribution was choosing the formidable General Trajan as his successor. Under Trajan, the empire reached its maximum territorial extent. His conquests in Dacia, modern-day Romania, brought immense wealth into the treasury, which he used to fund an extensive public building program, including the magnificent Forum and Column that still bear his name. He was known as Optimus Princeps, the best of rulers, for his justice and public generosity. Trajan's successor, Hadrian, was a different kind of emperor. A cultured intellectual and a tireless traveler, he consolidated the empire's borders rather than expanding them. He understood that Rome's vast territories were becoming indefensible. His legacy is etched into the landscape, most famously with Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a formidable barrier marking the northern frontier. He was a great patron of the arts and architecture, commissioning the Pantheon in Rome and his sprawling villa at Tivoli. The reigns of Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius continued this trend of peace and stability. Antoninus's rule was so peaceful, it was almost uneventful, a testament to the system's success. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, embodied the Platonic ideal of a ruler, but his reign was beset by wars on the frontier and a devastating plague, foreshadowing the challenges that lay ahead. This golden age represented the peak of Roman power and civic virtue, a model of governance that stood in stark contrast to the failures that would eventually lead to its decline. The year is 235 AD. On a distant frontier in Germania, the Emperor Alexander Severus is murdered by his own troops. It is a brutal, ignominious end, but it is also a beginning. This single act of betrayal lights the fuse on a powder keg that will explode across the Roman world, plunging it into a half-century of chaos, bloodshed, and terror, known as the Crisis of the 3rd century. The very foundations of the empire, which had seemed unshakable for centuries, began to crumble with terrifying speed. The ensuing 50 years saw no fewer than 26 so-called barracks emperors claim the throne, most of them ambitious generals who were hailed by their legions and dead within a few short years, often at the hands of the very soldiers who elevated them. This relentless cycle of civil war bled the legions dry, pulling vital troops away from the frontiers to fight other Romans. This internal weakness was a siren call to Rome's enemies. Along the Danube and Rhine rivers, Germanic tribes, the Goths, the Franks, the Alemanni, surged across the borders, raiding and pillaging deep into Gaul, the Balkans, and even Italy itself. In the east, the resurgent Sasanian Empire of Persia posed an existential threat. The Sasanian king, Shapur I, inflicted one of the most humiliating defeats in Roman history, capturing the Emperor Valerian in battle, and, according to legend, using him as a human footstool. The empire, beset from all sides and tearing itself apart from within, began to fracture. In the west, the general Postumus established the breakaway Gallic Empire, encompassing Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania. In the east, the brilliant Queen Zenobia of Palmyra carved out her own dominion, seizing control of Egypt and much of Asia Minor. For a time, it seemed as if the Roman Empire would shatter into three warring successor states. Compounding the military and political disasters was a complete economic meltdown. Desperate emperors debased the currency, mixing silver coins with worthless metals to pay their soldiers, triggering runaway hyperinflation. Trade ground to a halt, cities shrank, and a deadly plague swept through the population, killing millions. It was an age of utter despair, an apocalyptic storm from which it seemed Rome could never recover. Out of the blood-soaked anarchy of the 3rd century crisis, a new figure emerged. He was not a man of noble birth, but a soldier of humble origins from Dalmatia, Diocletian. Ascending to the throne in 284 AD, he possessed a keen intellect and an iron will, and he understood a fundamental truth that his predecessors had missed. The Roman Empire had become too large, its problems too complex for one man to rule alone. His solution was not merely a reform, it was a radical reinvention of the Roman state, a desperate gambit to save a dying world. This was the Tetrarchy, the rule of 4. Diocletian divided the immense empire into a western and an eastern half. He would rule the east as the senior emperor, or Augustus, and appointed a trusted colleague, Maximian, as Augustus of the west. Each Augustus then adopted a junior emperor, a Caesar, who would serve as their second-in-command and designated heir. Galerius was appointed Caesar in the east and Constantius in the west. This new system was designed to solve the two critical problems of the past century: imperial succession and military command. There was now an emperor near every major frontier, ready to respond to threats, and a clear, orderly line of succession to prevent the civil wars that had plagued the empire. But Diocletian's reforms went much deeper. He doubled the number of provinces, making them smaller and easier to manage. And crucially, he separated civil and military power, preventing any one provincial governor from accumulating enough power to challenge the throne. He overhauled the tax system, basing it on units of land and labor to create a more predictable state budget. To combat hyperinflation, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, a well-intentioned but ultimately failed attempt to fix the cost of thousands of goods and services. Believing that religious dissent bred political instability, he also unleashed the Great Persecution, the most severe and systematic assault on Christianity in the empire's history, in an effort to restore the authority of the traditional Roman gods. For 2 decades, this rigid, top-down system worked. Stability returned, the borders were secured, and the economy began to recover. Diocletian had pulled the empire back from the brink, but he had done so by creating an autocratic, bureaucratic state, a far cry from the Rome of Augustus. The Tetrarchy was a brilliant, desperate solution, but its survival depended entirely on the will of its architect. In 305 AD, Diocletian did the unthinkable. He and his co-emperor Maximian voluntarily abdicated, retiring to private life and allowing their Caesars to rise to power. It was the ultimate test of the Tetrarchy, a test it would spectacularly fail. The carefully constructed system of succession collapsed almost immediately, plunging the empire back into a complex and vicious series of civil wars as a new generation of ambitious men vied for ultimate control. Among them was Constantine, the son of the Western Caesar, Constantius. Stationed in Britain, he was illegally proclaimed emperor by his father's troops upon his death in 306. From this remote province, Constantine began a methodical and ruthless campaign to reunite the Roman world under his sole command. The decisive moment came in 312, as he marched on Rome to confront his rival, Maxentius. On the eve of the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, legend holds that Constantine had a vision. He saw a cross of light in the heavens, emblazoned with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign, you will conquer. He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, onto their shields. The next day, Constantine's forces crushed Maxentius, who drowned in the Tiber River during the rout. For Constantine, the message was clear. His victory was owed not to Jupiter or Mars, but to the God of the Christians. This event marked a profound turning point in Western history. The following year, Constantine and his co-ruler Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, officially ending all religious persecution and granting freedom of worship throughout the empire. It was not yet the state religion, but Christianity was now free to flourish under imperial patronage. Over the next decade, Constantine consolidated his power, eventually defeating Licinius to become the sole ruler of the Roman world. He would go on to found a new capital, a new Rome, on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, naming it Constantinople. This strategic move shifted the empire's center of gravity eastward, but his most enduring legacy was aligning the throne with the cross. The empire that had once executed Christ and his followers would now become the vehicle for the faith's expansion, a world-altering transformation born from a vision in the sky. The end of the Western Roman Empire was not a single fiery event, but a long, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts. After the empire was permanently divided between East and West in 395, the western half found itself on the defensive, its wealth and manpower dwindling, its borders porous and indefensible. The catalyst for the final collapse was the arrival of a terrifying new force from the steppes of Asia: the Huns. Their westward migration created a domino effect, pushing terrified Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, and others across the Roman frontiers, not merely as raiders, but as entire peoples seeking new homes and safety. In 410, a date that sent shock waves through the civilized world, the city of Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric. It was the first time the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years, a psychological blow from which the West would never truly recover. One by one, the vital provinces were lost. Britannia was abandoned to its fate. The Vandals crossed from Spain into North Africa, seizing the empire's breadbasket and crippling its economy. Gaul and Hispania were carved up into a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms. The Roman army itself was a shadow of its former glory, hollowed out and heavily reliant on barbarian mercenaries, or foederati, of questionable loyalty. Power no longer rested with the emperors in Ravenna, but with their powerful barbarian generals, men like Stilicho the Vandal and Ricimer the Goth, who acted as puppet masters, installing and deposing emperors at will. There were fleeting moments of old Roman valor, such as the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451, where the Roman general Aetius led a coalition army to halt the advance of Attila the Hun. But these were exceptions in a relentless tide of decline. The final act, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. In 476 AD, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus. But instead of proclaiming a new puppet, Odoacer simply sent the imperial regalia to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople, declaring that one emperor was enough. There was no great battle, no final stand. An empire that had dominated the world for centuries simply ceased to be.